Thank you, Concorda. We are rightly proud of much of the progress that we've made in Ireland over the past several decades, in particular in the last decade. Particularly, we have seen very positive and inclusive social progress made, and at a pace that has surprised many. However, despite this progress, we face a continued battle to achieve full inclusivity and equality within our society. And this is true of many different minorities and groups in our country, but also applies to the largest population group in the country, and that, of course, is women. The regrettable truth is that sexism and gender bias has been allowed to fester and spread throughout every aspect of our society for far too long. The pervasive and insidious nature of sexism has resulted in a situation where every woman in Ireland can recount multiple experiences where they were made felt physically or verbally harassed, or were made to feel uncomfortable in their working environment, took a longer route home for fear of their personal safety, or avoided public transport at night. This happens at Ceann Comhairle on a daily basis. It's happening in workplaces, it's happening in restaurants and pubs, it's happening in the home, and it has happened on the street. The tragic reality is that it happens far too often, so that so many women don't even report it or speak of it, and choose not to follow up on them. No one should have to endure these unsolicited and unacceptable encounters in this way. To tackle the scourge of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, we must build a broad coalition. Men, especially, must do better and must call out this behaviour when they see it. We, as men, must not tolerate the casual harassment or comments passed by other men about women. These women are mothers, they are daughters, they are sisters, they are our wives. They should not have to tolerate the behaviour of men who act in a way which is abhorrent to the decency within society. Education will play an important role in this effort, introducing extensive education programmes on consent, harassment, domestic, sexual and gender-based violence will be a positive step, and I am pleased that the Citizens' Assembly has recommended that this form part of the review of the relationship and sexual education curriculum in schools, and I know in quarter one of next year we will begin with the junior cycle. Some universities have already begun such models on campuses, and this should be increased across all levels of higher education, and I believe that Minister Harris is working to ensure that these programmes become a regular part of university life. The Assembly has also highlighted the importance of other recommendations, among them the removal of Article 41.2 of Bunreacht na hÉireann, commonly referred to as the Women in the Home, article. Section 2 of this article refers to the need for the state to ensure that mothers shall not engage in labour to the neglect of their duties in the home. It's jarring that in 2021 such a sentiment remains within our Constitution. While the removal of this article will not act as a silver bullet for this problem, it is yet another example of the casual and everyday sexism that women are subjected to. I'm also pleased that the role of technology companies has been highlighted in the recommendations. The spreading of private images and malicious nature of persistent harassment, bullying and other forms of abusive behaviour have no place on the internet nor on society. These activities must be removed without delay by the technological companies involved, and we in this House must hold those companies to account and ensure that they are doing all that they can to remove content such as this, and indeed social media users who engage in this sort of activity. I would also like to note that the Assembly has called for specialist training of judges and lawyers with regard to the treatment of victims, which includes the exclusion of their sexual history, their clothing, or indeed their character, as Deputy Higgins so eloquently put. While there are positive developments being led by government, such as the forthcoming publication of the third National Strategy on Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence, the Gender Pay Gap Information Bill, and indeed the recently introduced and mentioned Private Members Bill by my colleague Deputy Higgins, we are reminded that there is a considerable body of work that remains to be done. It will take years to complete, but it must be done. We must be bold and consistent in our efforts to root out gender inequality and everyday sexism in our society. The scourge of domestic violence tears at the fabric of our society and has profound ramifications for the victims and those close to victims. In 2020, there was a 17% increase in the number of domestic violence calls to Gardaí. This constitutes an average of 120 calls per day, totaling 43,500 calls over 2020 alone. Sadly, this number does not represent the full extent of domestic violence, as many cases go unreported and victims suffer in silence and in despair. Similarly, a report carried out last year by Transport Infrastructure Ireland highlighted the experience of women on public transport. It showed that 1 in 3 have been physically harassed on public transport, 55% of women avoid public transport at night, and 47% of women take a longer route home while walking due to safety concerns. The report is filled with statistics such as these, and it's a damning look at an issue that has been too long ignored by society as a whole. I myself recently witnessed vile comments being used on an evening dart. A group of young men used language aimed at a woman who was leaving the train, which had no place in discourse, private nor public. It was a disturbing event that should not have taken place, and the individual who chanted these phrases did so in the safety of their own group of friends with a sense of impunity. It was the truest form of toxic masculinity aimed at a lone woman. While this is an overt scenario, it speaks to the attitude of acceptance of some men, too many men, with regard to this kind of behaviour. The quiet language of the nod and wink, or whistle as a woman passes, or worse still, the catcall from scaffolding at a college student on her way to a lecture in the morning, dressed in jeans and a hooded top, who heard "walk of shame, love," as she passed, and the resulting feeling of uncomfortableness and fear for those women. That instance, incidentally, Ceann Comhairle, was not in this jurisdiction, but it is still valid. Ceann Comhairle, I have spoken many times on the need to build an inclusive, progressive and sustainable society. And we can do this if all people feel safe and if everyone, regardless of their race or orientation or gender, are treated equally. We must do all that we can to realise a truly modern Ireland, building on the progress of the past and supporting women and minorities rise up in business, politics, education and in every other aspect of society, to live the lives they choose without undue barriers being placed in their way for no other reason but the gender they were born to. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.